So thanks for coming, everybody. This is great. What a turnout. Today was a lot of talking, and I was actually meant to go change my outfit before this, but I didn't have enough time because I was just talking too much, but it was really fun. So that's a good sign, I think. So anyway, thanks for everybody coming. Good turnout. The fact that we have this great group of designers, a lot of support from everybody to put this event on is wonderful. So again, thank you. Round of applause to everybody. So thanks. So a couple things. So they just wanted me to let everybody know, emergency exits, one back here, obviously down the stairs, bathrooms downstairs, and no food and drink in the gallery area. So that's now you know. So thank you for the CCA. So love to team up with you guys, and as a member, I appreciate all the support the CCA has done and put the word out there to get more participation and bring a really good group of people together. So thank you, CCA members, everybody. We have the Vice Commodore and Brad over here. That's yep, thank you. And then Maggie, thank you so much for helping put this on and kind of spearheading this whole thing. So thank you. And then Jim is somewhere. Where's Jim? The ex-Commodore? Where's Jim? Jim, thank you. So good to see you. And then in terms of the designers, so great to have you guys. So I really appreciate the time. I know right now everybody is quite busy. So it's hard to get a group like this together, and appreciate the support, but I'm really excited to hear you guys talk and see what comes of the discussion. So thank you guys. And so let me list those out. So Doug Zurn right here. Thank you, Doug. Chuck Paine, Jay Paris, Bob Stevens. This is the first group. And then we'll do another panel. I think we're doing roughly 10 to 15 minute break. And then we'll start the next panel of Peter Boyce, Dave McCullough, Scott Judson, and Jim Taylor. So thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. And so we'll get this thing going. So John Hanson, he's the founder and publisher of Maine Boats, Homes, and Harbors magazine. He's going to be our first moderator. And then Aaron Porter will be the second moderator, and he's the editor of Professional Boat Builder magazine. So thank you, John and Aaron, for doing this. Really appreciate it. So, John, you're up.
Welcome to the Farnsworth and the Wyeth Center. I hope you guys get a chance to check out some of the art. This is like one of the great art museums in the United States, and so we're thrilled to have you all here. There's a box in the back with copies of my magazine if you'd like one. My first question I'm going to send to Jay Parrish, and I think it's one that, looking around this room, we're all going to realize it's one of our central questions we have to deal with. The yachting community is getting older and smaller. What are designers doing right now in order to engage a younger market, and what are they doing wrong? Jay.
Well, I'm no expert on junior programs, so I think I'll answer this in the light of people moving up into cruising boats. I subscribe to about 18 yachting magazines and study them all. There are the dinghy cruisers who are really camping out in minimalist boats, and then there are the small cruisers, say in the 15 to 20 foot range. But once you get above that, I think one of the problems we have is one of cost. And I remember talking to the head of Beneteau maybe 30 years ago saying, why don't you bring the 25 into the US market because it would be a good stepping stone up into your 30 and et cetera. He said, we can't make any money on them. So, there's a lot sort of given by profit. Another thing, I've been playing this game since the late 60s, and that's a scary thing is depreciation. In other words, thinking back, someone could have bought one of Roger Huson's first Sabre 28s, had it for a few years, expected to have 10 to 15% depreciation, think about getting out of it and moving up into a 32 or something of that sort. They're now depreciating like automobiles. You have it, and the price really drops quite a bit. So there's not the upward mobility that I saw. And then another thing is an indictment against the industry I'm in as technical editor of Sail Magazine. We announce all these new products. So we now have people coming into the marketplace who expect on their 28-footer to have a microwave, a full shower, widescreen TV, etc. And that's a long way from the O'Day Dolphin 24 that I started sailing on, that we thought was remarkable because there was a toilet under the V-berths up forward. So I guess I'll end that by saying we have a cost problem, and I don't know exactly what the solution is, but some creative minds. I've seen a concept for a boat that had 2 benches down below. You started out with that, and then you had like a galley module that could snap in, things of that sort. So maybe there are solutions out there.
Thank you, Jay. Bob, do you have any thoughts on this subject?
Well, I think some of the problem is making the transition from, I think we have youth that are interested in very small craft, like stand-up paddle boards, for example, and kayaks and sport boats, really small sport boats, laser-style boats. And making the transition from that to a larger boat is there's a significant jump that needs to be made, both in the cost and in the time commitment of the family as a whole. And changing that dynamic, I think, is just challenging. And another thing I think that contributes to the difficulty in keeping people, young people enthusiastic, especially about sailing, is that as a species, I think we tend to complicate things. That's just it's an inherent trait. And if you take as an example the Optimist Pram, ubiquitous training boat, the original mission of that boat was something that a family, a father and son, or a mother and daughter could build in the garage and take out and have fun racing at the local sailing club. And we have now made that so complicated with rules and measurements and requirements that it's no longer possible to build that boat in your garage and have it measure in and be a legal race boat. And it's that kind of foolishness that is kind of endemic through certainly through competitive sailing, that we need to be very careful about.
Thank you. I think my observation is powerboats rule the market, and that's where I see growth. But one of the things that I'm really curious is, do these people become lifelong customers? Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, I think to some extent they do. There are a number of families of powerboaters out there, many of which are built here in New England, and they have a long list of various models that people can kind of get into and move up through. And I think that's a wonderful way to keep people engaged. And they are taking advantage of that.
Chuck, what do you think? Do you think that the great growth in powerboat ownership are these lifetime customers?
I think so. I mean, I'm not worried about the powerboat side. It seems to be, growing again after the economic debacle we've been through. Looks pretty good. My heart is in sailing. It always was. I'd love to, even though I, closed my big office 9 years ago, I'm really interested in sailing and getting people back into sailing. Kids, that's part of it, but you've got community sailing, and that's going to do nothing but grow and grow. The idea that you don't have to own the boat and you just show up when you want to, and it's grab a life jacket and go sailing, and that's the way to deal with the cost, is just share a laser among 30 kids or whatever. So that side of it. But of course, what I did my whole life was really fancy yachts, and I did the sailboat side, and my partner Mark and Ed Joy did the powerboat side. Not worried about powerboats. I'd still like to see the joy that I got out of building my own Blue Jay. That's how I got started. And all the other kids, I was 13 years old, all the other kids were in their garage building Blue Jays, and they competed for how gorgeous their boats were. I mean, the way they were painted and varnished and everything. And I was one of those, and guess who I sold through my whole career, all the way up to retirement? It's those people that started, in Blue Jays and Mamaroneck and places like that. I'd love to see that start over again. I'm a commercial animal. I tried to pitch it. I gave a talk at the New York Yacht Club, and I actually did a design for them to present to them and a painting of the fleet off of Harbor Court. These people, they have all these big boats, but the men go out sailing way on around Brenton's Reef. The women stay in. Sometimes, the women go sailing too, but my idea was that you do something really small so it could actually be raced, inside the harbor there, right under the flagpole at Harbor Court. And to be sexist, maybe the women would sit up at the yacht club bar. No, it's the other way around now. The men would sit up at the yacht club bar and would bet on which of the wives would win the race. And you'd actually see them out there, because a large part of owning, at least what we used to do, it's showing off. You don't have to have one. So I think I'd like to see, and I'm trying to push, a renaissance in elegant small boats, and you would sell them as yacht club fleets. And if I were a better salesman, the New York Yacht Club and the St. Francis Yacht Club and blah, 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 they'd all have a fleet of 20 of these things. And after 2 or 3 years, they'd shit can the 50-footer that all they do is spend money on that sits in the marina, and they'd all be out having fun in this little boat. So there you go.
That would help all the yacht designers in the room. In the 60s and 70s, designing to the rule kept a lot of sailboat classes fresh, builders going, and bringing up new designers. Is that still happening? And if so, what are good examples of it? And I wonder if perhaps the most active part of that is the Spirit of Tradition class. From my vantage point, which is myopic on the coast of Maine, I'm seeing more new boats being built to the Spirit of Tradition and classic yacht races than I am seeing in other types of ocean racing. So Bob, as a designer of many of these fast boats, what do you think of that?
Well, until very recently, it wasn't possible to design a boat to the rule in any kind of Spirit of Tradition racing, because the rule was unpublished and very difficult to dig out.
It's a good way to tweak.
And so it's going to be interesting now that we've, through the offices primarily of Jim Taylor, who's going to be on the next panel, we've developed a rule that is now published and available for everybody to download and tweak all they want. It's intended primarily to enhance the classic racing portion of these classic yacht regattas, and where we don't worry about people building or modifying boats to fit the rule. It'll be interesting to see how serious we all get in the Spirit of Tradition part of that. So certainly, speaking from my practice, our response to designing boats to race in Spirit of Tradition has been to design boats that are really fun to sail and really fast, and they rate whatever they rate. So actually competing against handicap has not been part of the equation. It might be fun to play at that for a while.
Do you think that having this new rule in place, which I think develops a wonderful seaboat and a beautiful boat, is that going to stimulate more sailboat designs? Is that going to stimulate and return the preeminence of sailboat racing that we all grew up with?
We're just talking about the CRF, or Classic Rating Formula, which is, I think, is a very effective and simple rule, which is an anomaly these days, and I think is only restricted to the subset of racing that involves the classics and spirit of tradition boats. And so I think for those people in the classic racing community who are really interested in winning, yes, I think the fact that they can design a boat to a rule and know how the rating's going to come out will be an incentive to do more custom building, because they have some confidence in what the result may be. I think, though, that we need to be cautious about that, because the really great thing about the classic racing fleet is that we can all go out and sail for a day among beautiful boats and just enjoy that experience. And yes, it's fun to win, but it's not the most important thing.
Doug, have you have any familiarity with that new rule?
I do not, but I certainly agree with you that I think it will sort of help stimulate a little bit of new design and new criteria and possibly new build.
Let's hope.
Yeah.
Is that rule, if you wanted to go build a 28-foot boat in your backyard with a couple of your buddies, would you be able to build a competitive boat to that rule?
Sure.
Seeing as you're all driving, all beat-up Subarus.
Sure you would. Yeah. It's a pretty simple formula with some small factors of adjustment in it, and yeah, you could definitely. I mean, pretty much it rewards boats of good character, and so if you design and build a boat of good character, it's likely to be competitive.
Jay, would Sail Magazine be able to get behind promoting efforts like this? I have this, my wife doesn't give me ties anymore, as you can see. She gives me antique boat books, and it's great. I have this library of wonderful old books, and on the top of the pile in my living room is small sailing classes of New Zealand. And it's just really cool. And there was this whole culture there for years and years of you design it, you build it, you race it, you break it, you do it again. Mm. And I don't see that, being underscored by, quote unquote, Maine Marine magazines. What do you think?
Well, some magazines have design contests. Sail used to have them. With the tightness of budgets in the marine industry, getting predominant designers like, Rod Johnstone, people from the West Coast to fly in to judge these events have become prohibitively expensive. So I'm thinking back 2 decades ago to that. One sort of strange aside from my point of view about rating rules, going way back to when I worked at S&S, is people coming in to have their ratings lowered. That was a real drive. Now, if you believe in a rating rule and you lower your rating, you're making your boat smaller. I never saw people come in and say, can you up my rating? Because they thought they'd go faster than the rule said they were doing. Right. So there's this whole culture of working around a rating rule that can get strangely complex.
I could sit and talk about this for hours and hours and hours. And how do we grow and get more people? This comes back to that original question. How do we get more people to want to be excited about, doing this stuff in small sailboats or big sailboats? It doesn't have to, but I think small goes to big eventually. And how do we take this wonderful market that our friends at MJN and Sabre and Back Culver building of people who are becoming really passionate about being on the water. Is there any way we can entice them to become sailors? Doug?
You know, so one of the things I do see is how much people are enjoying their boats and getting on the water and enjoying their boats. I think from a sailing standpoint, the trickle down that's happened over the years with the various hardware and features on sailboats that make sailing easier have helped considerably. I think we need to continue to develop that. How to get people out of power boats and into sailboats, that's what you're asking.
I'm not saying I'm not saying get them out of powerboats into sailboats. I'm saying add a sailboat to the quiver.
I would love that.
Yeah, I think you should have a boat of kind of every persuasion, paddle, power, and sail.
And that's why we do them all. And I couldn't agree with you more there. You know, again, going back, I see as Chuck was saying, I see a lot of value in community sailing, and I see a lot of growth in community sailing, and I see a lot of kids racing through college, and we have a lot of kids joining clubs younger today, and I actually see a fair amount of growth in it, and I think that eventually will trickle up. And the key is to try to keep them engaged in sailing. Yeah. And how to do that is really, I think, with boats that are exciting to sail. And you know, I think continuing down that path, I think we as a country aren't quite as passionate about sailing as some other countries are, and they're developing boats that are fun to sail, and I think we need to continue to do that here.
So, Chuck, what was the boat that you were presenting to the New York Yacht Club?
It was a scaled down Herreshoff 12.5 with a fin, keel, and separate rudder. So in the water, it looked just like a brand new Herreshoff 12.5 with a very large person sailing it. I mean, it really, he's my guide. Thank you, Nat. A lot of my best work was basically adaptations of Nat Herreshoff's work. And that's what it was. It didn't fly, but I remain ever hopeful that someday it will. One of the things that Europe is doing right and that may bring kids, young people into sailing is these raids that they have over there. And it really hasn't taken off that much. I know there's one out on the West Coast, in the Northwest, and there's one down in Florida. But, okay, a raid it's a regatta that lasts a week long. They're small boats. A lot of them are built by the sailors themselves. They tend to be young sailors. But they number, in some cases, I think the biggest raid, which is in France, is something like 5,000. Oh, this is 5,000 young people. Then they spend a week in, typical, well, you've been there, you know the weather in Brittany. So it's raining, horizontal, blowing dogs off their chains. But the kids are out there, 5,000 of them or more, having a great time. So I don't think you're going to ever get people to move back. You just don't go back from motorboats to sailboats. I just have never seen it happen. But you might bring up a whole new generation if more, and it's up to the elders to organize a raid, but the area where so many of us learned to love sailing, which is from New York City east to the Cape and a little bit beyond, raids along that coast. The coast that if you're on the right side of the train, left side of the train going to, that beautiful Connecticut shore, to sail along that and camp each night for a week and meet, you're young and you're on the make, so you're meeting the opposite gender. I mean, it's wonderful, and we haven't started to do it yet. The Europeans have, and of course on the other end, on the classic boat side, the people of our age who've made it sometimes or can afford a very nice yacht are having a lot of fun racing traditional boat, not just spirited traditional, but Eggemogan Reach type stuff. Most of them not new construction, but they're restoring old hulks that are 100 years old and having, from my view of it, a lot of fun.
Well, yeah, and I think an important component of that, certainly in Maine, is the fact that over the course of a couple of decades, that event, the Eggemogan Reach Regatta, has evolved to include a series of events, one after the other. So it's essentially a grown-up raid where start in Castine, have a great sail down to Camden, spend the night in Camden, get back on the boat, sail over to Brooklyn, and have another regatta the next day in Brooklyn. And so it's the 3 whole days of getting away from your life and having an alternative life.
There's something about boats, well, racing, of course, is how probably all of us got started, and making it not a solitary. I mean, I love to go sailing across the ocean and swinging a sextant and stuff, but you know, the real fun is to be amongst other people that have the same values that you do. And that used to always mean racing, but the raid is a whole other thing. Nobody cares who wins. Spirit of tradition racing in Eggemogan Reach, yeah, we cared who won a little bit, but I never cared. I cared about that the boat was beautiful and the fact that my boat was enhancing 120 other people's day because it was gorgeous, and everybody else's boat was gorgeous too.
Going back to earlier comment of getting people out of power into sail.
I'm not saying getting them out of power.
No.
I am pleased. I have had a Ray Hunt power boat that I love dearly for 32 years. I'm not getting rid of that boat.
I'm not advocating that you should do that.
Adding sail to the equation.
But one of the topics that's brought up about power boats is people's lack of leisure time. And so people say, well, the reason we're going to power is I can zip out, do something, and whip back. I am showing how old I am. There used to be a type of boat in England called a 50-50. Now, it isn't like the chunky American motor sailors we had over here. It was taking a more or less normal sailing hull form and powering the hell out of it. And
it's called a McGregor.
Right.
They called it a what?
No, it's not.
McGregor 26.
And yeah, no, I'm not going down that route. But the thing is, if you took one of Bob's Spirit of Tradition hull forms and the rating truly allowed for an oversized prop, you could make a sailboat that would perform as well as a trawler yacht in terms of getting out and getting back. And so I don't see any designers moving in the direction of the 50-50. It'd be an interesting experiment to see if something like that was viable.
Can I see a show of hands of who is a member of a yacht club here? Any yacht club. And so I'd say it must be 2/3 of us here. What's your club doing to get new members? That's it, right there. When I was growing up, and probably when all of you were growing up, we would have these sailing regattas during the day, on weekends, where there would be 50, 100, 75 boats out. In Camden, there's no sailing on Saturday. There's no racing on Saturday. It's Wednesday night, which is, we who love this sport, who are members of clubs, have to figure out how to get more people into the clubs. I think that the idea of the clubs owning boats is something that we have to pursue diligently. I think that we have to get more people. I mean, it is, you know, the sailing club, we probably all grew up in the sailing club. It was my second home. And how do we instill that into the next generation? Really has to do more with how we reach out to the next generation than the designs of the boats that we have.
I do see some of that happening.
Good.
I do see some of that happening. That's why I believe that there is a good grassroots program there that is beginning to take
Because you're
shape.
seeing that in Marblehead?
Yeah, I definitely see it in Marblehead, for sure.
That's good.
And the Boston area.
Yeah, I was, before I came in today, I was thinking about this, and I went to the Leslie Jones collection at the Boston Public Library. If none of you have seen it, go check it out. He was a photographer who worked for the Boston Herald Traveler in the 30s up to the 50s, and there's one sector in there on sailing shots. And he has shots of Marblehead, and it's all like a impressionistic painting. It's just dots of boats. And I would love to see us get back to that. We have a few more minutes here, and one of the questions that's completely ungermane to what we've been talking about, but one that also is, I think, really interesting going on right now. What's the mode of power in power boats today? I mean, I go to a boat show and I see 32-foot center consoles with 350 horsepower outboards on the back.
That's small.
I see pod drives, I see jet drives, I see straight diesels. How do you guys, as designers, grapple with the diversity of power that's available today? There's never been really available before. Doug?
I love it. I mean, it's wonderful. My favorite story is, I think it's Larry Russo, who's a Boston Whaler dealer down in the Boston areas at the Newport Boat Show. And he's got a 40-foot Boston Whaler there with 4 outboards on the back. And somebody walks by, and says, "Why would you put 4 outboards on the back?"
I know the answer.
Yeah, because I can't put 5 on. I mean, I had a wonderful conversation with somebody today. I mean, there's so many different options available, and what that does is it gives you just that. It gives you options. We just launched 2 new MJMs. One is both are outboard boats, a 35, which makes some sort of sense, and then the 40, which people are sort of grappling with a little bit. But the market down in South Carolina and Florida, they want outboards where it's the water's shallow and they want to run up on a beach, so we give them outboards. And inboards have actually come back a long way now with technology and joystick control integrated with quick shift transmissions and bow thrusters. So you now have an inboard boat that you can control just as well as you can control a joystick jet boat or a joystick IPS boat. And actually joysticks have made their way all through all the propulsion systems, IOs and outboards. So all that technology is there and available. Outboards obviously have become a lot more efficient to some extent, but they're certainly quieter and a lot more reliable. So we all have that going for us. And diesel technology has come so far. They're cleaner, quieter. There's tons of options, and that gives all of us options on what we can do, what we want to do.
Yeah, I don't know how you keep track of all the innovations on that side. I mean, it's amazing what has happened in the propulsion side of the business.
I also have to say, I mean, the engine manufacturers and their support and their training and their relationships with us in the industry have vastly improved over the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
We have excellent support, good training, and they listen. And they listen to your feedback, they listen to your criticism, and they change product to make it better. So.
You guys sitting on the panel, the designers will be here in the next panel. Make your living as custom yacht designers. How do we move the market back towards people buying custom yachts?
One problem, I've had people come to me and said, I want a custom yacht. And one of my first rules of thumb is say, go find a boat that's a stock boat, that's close to what you want, probably equipped to the standard you want, and at least double the price. And I had a case where I told an owner, based on a cost per pound analysis, that the boat would cost $110,000. He looked at me incredulously. he and the builder got together and agreed on $65,000, and the price of the boat went well past the $110,000. So it's money, you know. You've got to figure out some innovative ways to try to keep the costs down, and part of that is keeping the owner under control.
I never had an owner I could control, I can tell you that.
I'm not going to touch that one. So, Bob, how do you respond to that? Certainly, I mean, there's really no need to go buy a new custom yacht. I mean, you could go to Craigslist and find probably a boat that will do just as well. But it's not the same thing.
Well, it's not the same thing. I think that, you know, we have to set our expectations. We have to be cognizant that many people aren't going to be well served by a custom yacht. It takes a special person to recognize how individual that person's needs are and decide that it's worth the additional investment. I think the other thing that we can do, though, a positive way to essentially attract people to the custom process is to talk about how rewarding the process itself is. I mean, it's you know, coming to Maine and having a boat designed, having input with the designer about what that boat's going to be like, going through the process of fine-tuning that vision, and then meeting one of the wonderful builders here in Maine and striking up a relationship and having that relationship endure through the year-long, 2-year-long build, and then most likely through much of the rest of your life is a really special experience. And I do think that today's buyers, today's clients are looking more at experience than product. I think that we have a trend in that direction. I think in every field, not just in yachts, that people are recognizing the value of that experience.
I think that we thank you guys, illuminating. Anyone have anything to ask our distinguished panel? All right.
Thank you.
This guy?
I thought it would be good while Bob's here and while Doug's here to point out that I write for John, and I look a lot like a guy up there who I worked for many years in the yacht design field, but now we just paint pictures. But while we've got you two guys here, I wanted to point out that the next thing I'm going to write in John's magazine is about the Hinckley fully electric launch. Fully electric meaning that when you run out of volts, you're not going anywhere. And that is a new trend in powerboat design, and to me a very, very interesting one. Bob has done a hybrid, which is sort of a diesel electric, so it was a way to get home if you ran out of volts and still had diesel. And Doug's done some that similarly don't have I understand they don't have a diesel engine. Is that any wave of the future in your opinion?
We figured out a way to recharge the battery as the boat goes down the wave. It's pretty... Yeah. I mean, I definitely think there's room there, and that market will definitely increase for, not so much for those of us on the coast line, because you do need to plug in eventually, but, or in Marblehead where we're in, you know, moorings. But lakes, inland lakes, California, we work with Duffy Duffield out there, electric boat manufacturer, and there's a huge market in all the California lakes that everybody heads out to on the weekends. All they do is go from house to house to house, and all those houses have plugs in them. And it's a great way to not burn fossil fuel and still have a good time boating. And we've been developing for the last couple of years boats that run at 25 or 30 knots. We're not there yet, but we're going to get there eventually, and I think you'll see a lot more of them out there on small inland lakes to start with, and then maybe, you know, run out to the Vineyard or Nantucket or to the small islands out here, run out for 2 or 3 hours, plug in. Hopefully you make it there.
Yeah.
I parked in front of the Farnsworth, and I parked in a spot that had a Tesla charging station,
Yeah.
Rockland
Oh, yeah.
Lane. So that will be coming.
So
And,
now I can't park there and charge my Tesla while I'm in here. But I do think, one of the, as we all know, one of the limiting factors with electric propulsion of any sort is battery capacity.
Yeah.
I did an interesting study a few months ago. We designed, a couple of years ago, we designed a modern version of a classic speedboat, all varnished topsides, 24 feet long, but a modern deep V bottom. And it was powered with a modern, essentially a Corvette V8 engine. And it was a really cool boat up on the lakes in upstate New York, and a 50-knot boat. And I just did a study saying, what happens if we try to make this electric? And so the first thing I did was I said, well, so we need battery capacity. How much weight can I devote to batteries? And so I said, well, the engine itself is 900 pounds in a 4,000-pound boat. So it's a big portion of the weight of the boat. And we take that out and replace it with batteries. Then I started taking out all the rest of the stuff that an internal combustion engine requires. The exhaust and the and the fuel, obviously, and various other components like that, and the soundproofing, which is not light. And I ended up taking 1,700 pounds out of my 4,000-pound boat. The electric motor that you put in is essentially a souped-up version of what a Prius has. It goes from 40 horsepower to 400 horsepower pretty quickly. You can do that just by changing a few controls on it. And so it weighs about 200 pounds. So you put that back in, you've still got 1,500 pounds to devote to batteries. But until battery capacity improves, you really don't have much. We tried taking all that weight and putting it into lead-acid batteries, and we found that you could run the boat at 50 knots for exactly 1 minute and 15 seconds. So you switch to lithium batteries and you adjust the top speed down to a more realistic 30 knots, and you can run it about an hour, or no, about 15 minutes at, let's see, I can't remember for sure. Anyway, you start being on the edge of possible with today's lithium batteries. But if we can realize some of the improvements that are sort of out there in the rumor mill for battery capacity, you start getting into a boat that is truly usable reasonably quickly. And so I think that's something we've got to keep an eye on. Could be pretty exciting.
The Hinkley Company has built one of these boats. That tooling and building that original boat cost a lot of money, and they're throwing the dice on it. The boat
Right.
is around the boat show, and they're attempting to sell it.
Yeah. Well, I think the way that boat can be used with the, let's see, it's something like a 25-mile range at full throttle, and 40 miles at fast cruise of 10 miles an hour or something like that. That's going to fit the way many, many people use their boats. So I don't think it's a tremendous risk. I think it's going to require people adjusting their expectations in the same way that buying an electric car does. But I don't think it's way out there beyond the realm of possibility that people will buy this thing.
Batteries are improving rapidly, as I think Bob is sort of alluding to. I follow a lot of aerospace journals, and just in the last week there was an announcement of a company hoping to come to market within the next 3 to 4 years of an electric commuter airplane good for 350 miles. And so that's a big jump up from where we are today.
So with 350 miles, you pretty much go straight up and then glide.
Yeah.
yes.
Quick question, getting back to the sailing argument. Has the America's Cup helped, hindered, or had no effect? I come from the ice boating end of things, and it's been immensely interesting to us, okay? exhibition on a small race course with boundaries and, kind of tunes for television. Was that a plus or a minus?
I would say it had no effect. Would be.
No effect.
It's been really interesting. I don't think it affects what happens in our world much at all.
This didn't go over very big when I mentioned it 20 years ago, but I said, looking at all the money that goes into the America's Cup, there should be a 10% tithe on all the money spent on the America's Cup to go into junior and young people sailing. No one stepped up to the plate.
You guys have been talking about, the barbell. We talk about how do we get people at the time to buy our luxury yachts
Right.
For the existential pleasure, which is worth it, of going through the process. And how do we get kids into sailing? And I can't explain the former, but the latter is champions. And I think the champions are community people like yourselves that are so involved and so passionate about it to put the impetus where the mouth is and help that happen. Because if we don't do it, nobody will.
Yeah, there's a lot of, not yacht clubs so much anymore, but I was on the board of the little sailing school in Tennant's Harbor, and you got a bigger one in Rock, 10 years ago, none of these things existed, and so these are all new kids getting introduced to sailing. Problem is, for some reason, they opt out at, 20 or 25 years old, maybe because it's tough to make a living, I don't know.
That's the tricky part, is keeping them engaged through that period.
Right.
And that's an inexpensive, fun boat that it's not the house of the boat.
So I think some yacht clubs are stepping up and letting members in at substantially discounted rates to just keep them involved and engaged. But that's the hardest part, is to transition them through the period of the youthful sailing, which kids still love to do, but they just run out of time and resources once work starts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
In
until
the
you
back, over here.
John Lynn from Belfast. There's, just within reach here, there are probably a dozen yacht clubs. From where I live in Belfast, you can pretty much see Castine, Bucks Harbor, Northport, Rockport, Camden, Rockland. The programs, the sailing programs for the youth, from what I've been able to see, is basic sailing skills and racing. I haven't seen anything involving cruising for the youth. And, all of the yacht clubs are within a day sail of each other. Is there any communication among the yacht clubs to get kids interested in cruising? Because I think cruising, in my opinion anyway, is what drives people into becoming customers of the yacht designers and builders.
That's a good point and a good question. I don't think that the yacht clubs are designed to do that, and I agree wholeheartedly. I love the concept of the raids that were talked about earlier, and how can you merge them into youth sailing so that the kids are going off to islands unsupervised, girls and boys. It could get interesting.
There are some exceptions to the comment made there. You could Google High Noon, which was a boat made up of a bunch of teenagers with a couple of 40-year-old fathers that finished second in the review race. Pretty big deal for these kids. And how that happened, just two men decided that let's put together something that we appreciate, that would be attractive to our children and their friends. That kind of thing can be done. And all of us who do own boats can look around and take people aboard who are younger than we, and that's easy to do because just look around the room. And I just add one other thing. In our local club down at Pound's Neck, we have a dozen sonars, which I put in about 15 years ago. And I did so only on the basis of community, not limited partnerships, but joint ownership. Every boat is owned by 3 different families. So that assures that the boats are out there all the time, because one of at least 3 owners is present. And rather than have the club own all the boats, where nobody has to care, if you will.
Right.
Because
Mm-hmm.
it is involved, 36 families, and they're all adult sailors. We do actually on Saturday have out there and rock around. sailing. That's
Yeah.
I think that's a great idea. Marnie?
Yeah.
Hi.
So, I don't even know if I need this, but so there's been a lot of talk about just how the sailing community and the yachting community is getting a lot older, and how you are trying to think of different ways to appeal to a younger generation. There are actually a few people here today from the landing school who are pretty young designers. What do you guys think that we can do as young designers who are just breaking into the industry now? What can we do to help appeal to a younger generation, and what can we do now to equip ourselves to help the industry in the best way that we possibly can?
That's a good question. As I said earlier, I think that whether sail or power, I mean, we need to bring fresh new ideas to market, and we have to look at how people are using their time and what they like and what features we need to incorporate into the designs of the boats. So you as a young designer has to bring that to whatever position you may end up at, and figure out how to resolve it and fit it into the design. But having a pulse on young kids today is there are future boaters, so we've got to figure that out.
Yeah, I think, especially here in the Northeast, the boating and yachting community is deeply tradition bound, and that has been a wonderful thing in terms of certainly spirit of tradition design kind of reinvigorates the traditional aesthetic, but I think it's a double-edged sword, and it keeps us very conservative, and that is a real danger to continuing to stay relevant and vibrant in the younger generation. And so I think one of the challenges that young designers face is honoring the tradition that that the industry and their older clients are going to bring to the table, but not being bound by that tradition, to be ready to adventure out from inside the box and show their clients and the boating community what can happen with some fresh thinking.
I think there's one thing that you've got to do is that I strongly believe that, particularly with sailboats, also true of powerboats, that it's got to be beautiful. And some of the mass production boats, and I won't name names, but tend to be made down in Florida.
Not so much.
They look like wedding cakes. There's apps there to make them cheap. You highly tool the upper thing, and then you highly tool the lower thing, and you glue it together. You don't even use screws. I mean, yeah, it made them cheap, but they were ugly, and I think we lost a lot of people. So I would strongly recommend that you do what we're naval architects, we're architects, what architects used to do. They used to go to Europe and study the facades of palaces. And I did the same. I studied Sparkman Stevens. I could draw a Sparkman Stevens boat better than Olin could. But you've gotta study beauty, and you've gotta make yachts beautiful. Because you look out in the used boat market today, they can pay you to take them away. Who the hell wants some of these ugly things? So study beauty, make your yachts beautiful, and if you build it, they will come.
And I think that the key line in there is if you build it. I would highly recommend you guys design something that you want and you build it. I remember this guy over here, he built his first boats. And that was your master's degree.
Well, some of them floated.
Yeah. But if you design something that turns you on and you put the time and effort to build it, and it really doesn't make any difference how big it is, and then you promote it. You promote it through YouTube, through all the other channels, and you promote your excitement. That is what is going to make this sport grow, is your excitement. Thank you all. I think that we've run out of time in this panel. There are refreshments downstairs. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.